What's up, y'all? Appreciate you coming through. Happy New Year. Like, subscribe. This is another one of those videos where we're gonna take the console war to hot combating, and we're gonna put that to the side. It's a new year, a new beginning, and we'll get back to that. Don't worry about it. For now, we're gonna talk about something different today. Today, it's about the future. Now, I'm not a futurist, but I like futurists. I like to look at future. I like to kind of not research, but when a futurist comes on and they got a video and they talk about the future and they deck out their house with all this future stuff, I'm like, that's kind of cool, right? Kind of started in the 60s, before I was born. But futurism, as far as how technology has evolved and what it is now versus when it was back then, is interesting. It's a little scary, but Matrix and all that stuff. But pertaining to video games, it's interesting to think about, because when we think about video games, like the future of video games, we have to look at the past. Now, I have to go to my YouTube because I forgot what the whatchamacallit was. Why am I doing this? Let's do this. It was right there. Actually, I don't remember. Well, it was AP, and they asked me what was the feature set of the new hybrid super console that we had dreamed up weeks ago. And so I took that and I said, and decided to give a little twist on it, because a future ultimate console that doesn't exist would pertain to the future consoles that will exist from Microsoft and Sony, and we can say Nintendo, but let's be realistic. You know what they do. We're not talking about them right now, okay? We're not talking about Nintendo. Okay, that's not just a Nintendo. I'm just saying they on another turnpike. We on 95. That's all. So, in order to talk about the future, we must look back. Now, we don't have to go all the way back. This little chart, this is on Wikipedia. I was looking for a minute. I was looking for an adequate chart, an adequate illustration of the history of video games. Couldn't really find one. So I was like, you know what? We're just going to have to talk through this one. So the important video game, when you talk about console wars, the important players were this. Atari 2600, ColecoVision, right? That was the first batch. It wasn't the first generation, but it was the first batch. NES Master System, that was the second war. The third was Genesis, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, right? Zoop. Next one was Sega Saturn, PlayStation, Nintendo 64. That's when PlayStation jumped into the game. The next one, Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, OG Xbox, GameCube, right? After that was the 360, the PS3, then last generation, Xbox One, PS4, and now we're at Series X and PlayStation 5. So that's the history as far as console wars in each generation. The important players. Everybody else, the freaking Aquarius and the Odyssey and all that, don't care. Don't matter. They weren't even into contention. You know what I'm saying? I didn't even mention the Switch because technically they're part of the video game industry, but they're not in this war. The war, because they're not... it's not a one-to-one comparison. You can't take a Switch and say, "Oh, look at the Switch versus the PS5." That doesn't work. So that's why they're not in the war per se, but they are part of the industry, and they are part of the war, but not directly. Anyway, so the commonality on all of these generations up to a point was an improving of the hardware, such that you get better sound quality, and graphics and graphical performance, which meant back in the day, colors. You get more color. This is how basic it was back then. You got more colors. You get more sprites on the screen, less flicker. It's fat. No slowdown. That's what the basic gaming, son. It was basic back then. honestly, the slowdown help you though. And some of them games is mad hard. I remember playing Power Strike, and I'm like, oh, the slowdown, they be flickering, and you be like, all right, now I can navigate. It's like automatic slow motion, kind of help you. But full speed, hard. Anyway, so as we go through the generations, like let's go to the first one that's on our list, Atari 2600 versus ColecoVision, right? Atari 2600 had more games. ColecoVision had better graphics. It was a better performing machine. So, which one did you prefer? Atari 2600 was a more popular system because it had more games. This is how it was back in the day. It wasn't all about graphics. It wasn't about exclusives. I mean, everything was exclusive, basically. Well, kind of, sort of. Anyway, moving to the next, Master System versus NES. Once again, the NES had more games. Master System had better colors and better graphics, but it didn't have as many games. It barely had any third-party games. It was all first-party games. It's kind of a weird kind of thing that Nintendo was kind of evil back in the day. They locked down their game. Like, yo, you on Nintendo, that's it, and that's all. You can't do nothing else, son. Yo, Nintendo was, Anyway, so that was the thing. Nintendo had more games, but there were less colors. The sounds, I think the sound was better on the NES, but I think they had less sound channels, if I'm not mistaken, maybe. Like I said, Sega Master System was, I believe, a more powerful system. Had more colors, definitely. I think I had 32 colors. NES had 16 or so. Look, this is what we're talking about here. All right, moving on. We go to Sega Genesis versus NES, right? Now, the Sega Genesis was... It was... That's hard. It's kind of... I'm Sega. I'm on a Sega camp, son. I'm Sega team. Team Sega. I recognize what Nintendo has done for the industry. I recognize what they do. I recognize what the NES was. Sound-wise, the NES was interesting, but it used a lot of samples, but they were low quality. It sounded like hot trash, but it was like, oh, snap, that's like a real guitar sound. Oh, that's a real drum sound, but it was all compressed and garbagey. Meanwhile, on the Genesis, synth. They had a Yamaha synth chip in that bad boy. Man, I was like, yo, that's crispy, son. And then Streets of Rage came out. Forget about it. And see, the thing about the Genesis that was better than Nintendo, and yes, Super Nintendo, is that they can still implement. You had PCM, you had FM, and then you had like sound effects or whatever they call it. And they put all of these together. How many tracks was it? Was it 8 tracks? 8 channel, I think, at the most. Maybe 6. But they thug thizzle on it, and I was like, yo. They could do voice. I mean, you could do voice samples on NES and Master System too, but they did some work. So I would say Sega Genesis had better sound. Super Nintendo had a better kind of FX. Was it Super FX chip? I forgot what it's called. The Mode 7, Mode 8, whatever it's called. So they could do the 3D stuff. Eventually, the Genesis could do that, but through software, not hardware. So that was the difference. And then some of the cartridges on the NES, Super NES, had some additional power for features and such. And also the but we're gonna skip over the 32X and the Sega CD because. So moving on to the next generation, which was Sega Saturn, PlayStation, Nintendo 64. We're not even talking about the Jaguar. No. So the Saturn was primarily a 2D game that was supposed to kind of emulate or translate their 80s arcade machines, Afterburner, Outrun, Space Harrier, all the Galaxy Force 2, all those games, which I love. Those that's my jam. And it did that perfectly, right? But the PlayStation was a true 3D. I guess the Nintendo 64 was too, but it was cartridge based, so they were limited in space. But the PlayStation was the first true 3D system as far as hardware. Well, it did it better. Anyway, I believe the Sega Saturn really wasn't 3D. It was like 32-bit chips that they slammed together. It was very difficult to program for. Anyway, doesn't matter. PlayStation won that because of the technology they had in their PlayStation, and it was just a better 3D machine. You know what I'm saying? So when the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, N64 was out, that was the jump into 3D, right? So the power changed from sprites and colors to polygons and frame rates, ostensibly, words, basically. Moving on. Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, GameCube, OG Xbox. So now we're into 3D, right? So once again, you get more polygons, more objects, sprites, whatever, objects, sound quality, you know, and once again, the resolution is important. Okay, the resolution's better, which makes the graphics look better, the polygons and all that stuff. So now the Switch is into resolution, is into you know, how many triangles can this machine push and all that stuff. So from the PlayStation, Sega Saturn to, you know, to present day, that's what it's been basically. And they've been refining the techniques as far as, you know, filtering, ambient occlusion. Now ray tracing is the new term. It's not the new term. It's been around for 30 years or whatever. But as far as video games go, it's becoming more of a ubiquitous, not theory, a ubiquitous technique to be used. So moving forward, I know it took 10 minutes to get there, but moving forward, the next generation of consoles, I believe, will have some sort of just everything's ray tracing, right? So NVIDIA, right? Now I know NVIDIA doesn't make the hardware for these consoles, it's AMD, right? But this is just an example of the future, right? So NVIDIA is leading the way in ray tracing as far as GPUs on the PC front, right? So they say that the 30 series, which is the 3090 and all the subsequent cards, they do ray tracing, but it's killing the systems, right? So now they're talking about the 40 series, the RTX 490 or whatever they're gonna call them. And they're saying that it's gonna be basically like double the performance of the 30 series. So it's like, oh, well, if the performance is double, which means hopefully the efficiency is halved, or the efficiency is doubled as well. So you can get twice as much performance out of the same. So basically, like if you say, okay, I want ray tracing on, you do it on a 3090, and you can get 60 frames at 4K. Let's just say, it's just example, right? And then you say, okay, we're gonna do 40. We're gonna do the same thing, you know, 60 frames at ray tracing the 60 frames at 4K, but on a 40 series, then you could probably get double the frame rate. You know what I'm saying? So that's just a layman's dummy, not even math type of explanation, but this is what's gonna happen as far as the technology for video game consoles. Now we have to take into account that this is gonna be AMD stuff. AMD is behind NVIDIA when it comes to ray tracing on hardware and stuff. So if we look at what the equivalent of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series are as far as ray tracing and all that stuff, it's there. If you want to take the correlation of an NVIDIA card, it's like what did they say, a 2080 or 2070, you know, with ray tracing. So I'm like, okay, that kind of sucks. So what is happening now though, with not the advent, but with the technologies within the Unreal Engine 5, they're figuring out ways to be more efficient, to fake the funk. Better smoke and mirrors, if you will. Not just raw, yo, we're going to actually ray trace so it looks like for real. No. They're going to fake it till they make it. They're going to fake it so that they can get the performance, but still get a pretty close representation of what the real ray tracing would be. So like Unreal Engine 5 has Lumen, which is their global illumination solution. It's not ray tracing. It's software based. I mean, okay. It's kind of like a hybrid, right? It's like a general type of ray tracing, if you will, without actually explaining it, because I know the rudimentary basics of how it works. And so it's kind of like, say there's a building here, right? And the light is coming from, and then it bounces off it doesn't actually bounce off the building. They have kind of geometry shapes that act as bounce points, if you will. And I mean, I guess it uses the texture, was it the texture information for color information, but honestly, I don't actually know, and I might be 1,000% wrong, but I know it's not ray tracing for real, because there are points where if you look at like the Matrix Resurrection, whatever it's called, Awakens, that's it, right? That demo, they showed if you look at the cars, there's reflections on the cars, but the glass doesn't have reflections. So there's certain things that are missing ray tracing wise, because it doesn't actually have ray tracing, as far as I understand. So they're doing something that makes it look like, oh snap, that looks like kind of ray tracing, but no, if you look at it close, it's like, no, it's not really, you know. So they are faking the funk real good on the Unreal Engine 5, but I will say this will be the kind of prediction as far as like going forward, which is good and bad at the same time. What is happening is I'll say the industry is figuring out ways to be more efficient with the technology. So like what is it on Unreal? The resolution, super resolution, FRS. I don't remember what the acronym is, and I actually don't remember what it's called. But it's the super resolution basically. So they can have the native resolution as like 1080p, and they could bump it up to 4K. They do some whatever technique, and it bumps it up. There are artifacts when they do that, but it's so close to actual native 4K that it's like, okay, yeah, that's real. That's like, you couldn't distinguish if, I mean, you can, but it's very difficult to. So techniques like that, techniques like Lumen, Sony has their own software ray tracing solution. They've been working on it for years. Since PlayStation 4, they've been working on this solution, and they are using it because the PlayStation 5 doesn't have enough hardware cores to push hardware accelerated ray tracing. All their stuff is software. That's not a bad thing, but when you look at the PlayStation 5, if you have to dedicate CPU cycles or GPU cycles to no, that would be CPU cycles, right? Since it's software, right? So if you have to do that, well, that's a good question. Would the GPU still do software emulated ray tracing? I mean, software ray tracing versus because hardware would be GPU cores, so it might be CPU. Regardless, the way that the PlayStation works, it throttles the speed for temperature and blah, blah, all that stuff, which is interesting. Long term, how does that work when you're trying to implement some new techniques and technologies? Is it going to fall short? That's the question. We don't know yet. And right now, like there was a thing. It was probably on Twitter or something where they were like, "Oh, all the ponies are praising or are celebrating because the PlayStation 5 barely performs better than the Xbox Series and on that Matrix demo." I was looking at it, I was like, they got like 3 frames or something on it. And I was like, okay, sure. Maybe that's just due to the I/O speed. Who knows? I don't. But it's interesting. Future, I mean, like peripherals as far as like controllers will adapt and change. I think the next batch of controllers will have probably even more enhanced haptics, especially on the Xbox side. They'll probably put more haptics or put haptics in it and replace those old school motors in them. I mean, if you think about it, the Xbox One had the trigger motors, for primarily for Forza, and they were cool. I was like, oh, it's not rumble triggers, and then PlayStation took that, Sony took that, and said, okay, let's do some extra. So now it's Xbox's turn to do some extra. So I mean, that's cool. That's the competition thing happening. That's cool. So the controllers will, I think, incrementally get better. PlayStation really doesn't have to. I think they have too much on the controller. There's a lot of wasted technology in there that nobody uses. It's like that touchscreen, dude. That could be a button. They don't need that, but whatever. So possibly the PlayStation Dual Senses or whatever they're gonna call them going forward, they might actually take stuff away. Who knows? But As far as generally speaking, I think like the Xbox One, the Series controller is the base, and then like I said, additive haptics. The trigger stuff, I don't think that's gonna catch on. It's more of a gimmick. But the haptic feedback, as far as the vibrations, sensories around the actual controllers, I think that's something that can be additive without taking away, basically. So on the controller side, sure, that's cool. VR is always VR will continue to be niche until there is one VR headset that is A, affordable, and B, can work on everything. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of a thing. Sony is on this thing where they're like, yo, we're gonna be like Apple, or we're gonna do very bespoke technology. You can only use it on PlayStation, blah blah blah, right? Microsoft is more generous. They're like, whatever, play it wherever, use what I predict. I said this before, and whenever Microsoft does jump into VR, they're gonna be like, yo, you could use the Quest or the Meta goggles, whatever they're called. They be like, whatever works on PC works on the Xbox. Let's go. That's what's gonna happen. And because first of all, they don't have to make it. They're like, it already exists. Go buy one and slap it in there. Boom. And then they'll put whatever the VR store into Game Pass, and they're done. They don't have to actually do anything except make a couple of deals, throw some money around, and have an API to access the store, the VR stores and stuff. They're setting it up pretty good. Well, anyway, we're talking about technologies and stuff, graphics. So if you want to break it down to the basics, like the PlayStation 6 and the Xbox Series Alpha Cube Beta, whatever it's called, the Xbox Infinite, it will be able to push more, of course, more graphics cores. So if we're talking, if you think about what they can do now, right? And like, oh, it's kind of ray tracing and some in low res. Like you think about all like Spider-Man, Miles Morales, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's got ray tracing, right? But the ray trace reflections are a quarter resolution or something, right? Versus the actual resolution of the game. So moving forward, next gen, it'll be better. It'll be twice as much. It'll be half resolution, or it'll be full resolution. You know what I'm saying? So stuff like that will happen. As far as emerging techniques and technology, that's something I can't really predict because I'm not really a programmer, so I don't know how. I mean, you can extrapolate or kind of go off of what they're doing now as far as ray tracing and Lumen. Maybe there's a better hybrid down the road where it's like, okay, this is more accurate than Lumen, but it's not as expensive as ray tracing, traditional ray tracing or path tracing. You could go that way, and that's a solution for lights and all that stuff. So that actually helps programmers and artists a bigness, right? So it's like, boom, if they when I say they, whoever, figure out the best kind of ray tracing solution, the best, better than what Unreal is doing right now, then that will help all the devs and all that stuff, and it works and it's easy to implement and all that stuff, right? So they can do that. Then you say, okay, then they have the LOD stuff, which Nanite, I didn't even talk about that, which is Unreal again. So I would predict that all these bespoke engines that all these companies are using that isn't Unreal will probably try to come up with their own type of nanite solution where it's I saw a description or an example or an explanation of what nanite is, and they compared it to Outrun, the old arcade game, Outrun Sega, and how the sprites were like way back in the distance in the background, right? And it was super scale. It was a super scalar game, so it would scale up, right, and then pass the camera. So what they did back then was they had different models. They would still scale it up, but it was different models at different points in the Z plane or whatever, right? So it would switch when it gets to a certain point, switch, but it was a smooth transition because it was still scaling. It would scale the small model up to the second one, then it would pop to the second one and still scale up to the final one, and then it would scale that one past the camera. So that's kind of the comparison with Nanite. Nanite does the same thing where it takes a LOD, if you will. Well, it's not LOD, but it takes a lower resolution mesh object way back, right? And then as it moves within the 3D space, you know, it switches the different geometries. Basically, it's, if you look at the nanite screen with all the triangles, you see it's all shifting and stuff. So it's kind of cool, and you can see the difference between like an Xbox Series S and an X, and the difference in the triangles and how many and stuff. And so I was like, that's pretty cool. That's a very ingenious way to think about it and how to do it. And I'm pretty sure they had the patent on that, but maybe somebody can come up with a solution that is similar but not infringing on it, or just pay for the patent. Who knows? But I think that type of thinking and that type of ingenuity as far as programming in these game engines is what is ultimately going to push the next generations into a place where it's like, okay, now, yes, this is a super jump. You know what I mean? Unreal Engine 5 is a super jump. You look at the Matrix, whatever it's called, I just can't remember, Awakens, and you look at Hellblade 2, and you're like, I mean, I could see how it's a game, but damn, that looks good. You know what I mean? And they were saying today, it was like, oh yeah, it doesn't actually use a lot of the Unreal Engine 5 stuff. They are porting it to Unreal Engine 5 from Unreal Engine 4, but it still doesn't utilize it like fully. They were saying like nanite, it wasn't using nanite or something like that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So once they do the full implementation of it, then it'll be dope. I know Project Mara, I think that's called. That will. The graphics on that are ridiculous. It looked like look. Everybody got fooled. I thought it was, oh, they just taking video of homeboy's apartment. That's where he lived. That was actual in game. I was like, oh wow. And I watched it again. I was like, they're doing some crazy things. So, but anyway, I mean, I hope it's very hard to predict, you know, what the future brings, because like I said, I'm not a programmer. I don't know what the emerging technologies are, but based off of the Unreal Engine 5 stuff, extrapolate from there, then you can say, okay, yo, this is gonna be tight, this is gonna be good. I mean, sure, maybe the bit rate on sound will be higher or something like that. Maybe you get more channels, but you don't need more than 100, honestly. You know, so you know, VR, like we went over that. You know, latency will get better. There are things that will get better, you know, as far as latency, and then online latency and all that stuff. That stuff will get better. That's just, you know, as stuff gets faster and faster. And then you talk about like streaming stuff. That stuff will get closer to native, you know. But that's just technology getting better and better. And that's how we have to look at it. When you look at like where it came from, when it was just sprites and colors, to now polygons and ray tracing. So, you know, as far as what they look like, that doesn't matter. But I mean, that's basically it. I appreciate you hanging out. I appreciate you listening to my domain. Like, subscribe. I think I'm gonna upload the video today, the music video. Today is the 1st of January. I should have said this way in the beginning. Happy New Year. I said that already, but yeah, I'm gonna do it tonight. So yeah, I appreciate you guys hanging out. Watch the video when it comes out. It's gonna come out tonight, maybe, hopefully. I don't know. Whatever. I'm just talking words now. You know, I can't find my mouse. There it is. All right, tilt away.